3 days after Ambassador Taehyun's declaration, the galaxy burned with the fires of revolution. On the bridge of the human battleship Defiance, Commander Song Ji-hoon watched tactical displays showing conflicts erupting across dozens of star systems. The old order was fighting desperately to maintain control, but the awakening had begun. Status report, Ji-hoon commanded, his stealth fleet emerging from behind the rings of a gas giant to engage a Velkari patrol group. 17 species have declared independence from the Council, reported his tactical officer. The Zelthari Confederation was the first, followed by the Altuni Republic. They're requesting human assistance with genetic reversal procedures. Ji-hoon nodded grimly. The Velkari ships opened fire with crystal beam weapons, but human vessels equipped with architect technology proved surprisingly resilient. Energy shields that had protected ancient cities now protected human ships. On Centauri Prime, Han Soo-young worked frantically in a hidden diplomatic center, coordinating with resistance movements across the galaxy. The young diplomat had never imagined her career would involve organizing galactic revolution, but the universe had strange ways of testing people. The Nexari collective is fracturing, she reported to Earth via quantum communication. Individual Nexari are remembering their personal identities for the first time in centuries. It's chaos, but it's beautiful chaos. Meanwhile, deep in the core worlds of the former Council territory, Kang Jae-hwan made contact with the most significant discovery yet. The engineer had volunteered for the dangerous mission to activate dormant architect facilities, and what he found exceeded every expectation. Command, "You're not going to believe this," Jae-hwan transmitted from inside a massive structure that hung in the void between stars. The architects didn't just leave technology behind. They left themselves. The ancient facility came alive around him as his unmodified human neural patterns triggered systems that had waited 50 millennia for activation. Holographic figures materialized throughout the vast chambers that preserved consciousness of beings who had transcended physical existence. "Welcome, inheritors," spoke a figure that looked almost human but taller and more graceful. "We have waited so long for minds that could perceive the truth." Back in human space, the war was intensifying. The Velkari Empire had launched their grand fleet toward Earth, confident that overwhelming force would end humanity's rebellion quickly. They had not counted on the determination of a species that had spent generations dreaming of the stars. At New Seoul Station, Captain Lee Dong-hae prepared his outnumbered defenders for the battle that would determine Earth's survival. The orbital fortress bristled with weapons that combined human engineering with architect principles, creating destructive power that the attackers could not comprehend. "They're coming in waves," reported his weapons officer, as Velkari crystal ships filled the view screen. "Estimated enemy strength, 300 vessels. And we have 30, Dong-hae replied calmly. But we have something they don't." The battle began with the Velkari fleet confident of easy victory. Their energy weapons had dominated galactic warfare for thousands of years, reducing enemy ships to crystallized dust. But when their beams struck human shields, something unexpected happened. The architect technology didn't just absorb the energy, it redirected it. Velkari weapons fire bounced back at the attackers, turning their own power against them. Within minutes, the seemingly impossible began happening. The human fleet was winning. On dozens of other worlds, similar scenes played out as species that had forgotten their warrior heritage rediscovered their strength. The genetic modifications had suppressed their capabilities, but the reversal procedures were working faster than anyone had hoped. Dr. Park Ji-won, now coordinating the medical aspect of the revolution from a hidden research station, watched in amazement as brain scans showed dramatic changes in treated individuals. "The neural pathways are rebuilding themselves," she announced to her team. "It's as if the modifications created artificial barriers, and removing them allows natural development to resume." But the most significant changes were happening in the architect facility where Kang Jae-hwan continued his communication with the ancient consciousness. "Your species shows great promise," the architect told him, "but the path to transcendence requires more than just military victory. You must help the galaxy choose growth over stagnation." "How?" Jae-hwan asked, still awed by the vast intelligence before him. "By teaching them to dream again." The modifications didn't just limit their abilities, they limited their imagination. Show them what's possible. Across the galaxy, the tide of war was turning. The Karathan gas dwellers, freed from their collective programming, began constructing cities that spanned entire planetary atmospheres. The Nexari, rediscovering their individual creativity, produced art and music that stirred emotions long suppressed. But the Council forces weren't giving up easily. Veltaran herself led a desperate assault on the human fleet at New Sol Station, her flagship bristling with weapons that could crack planets. "You have doomed the galaxy," she transmitted to Captain Donghae. "Without our guidance, species will destroy themselves with unchecked aggression." "Maybe," Donghae replied as his ship maneuvered through a field of crystal debris. "But maybe they'll become something wonderful instead." The final phase of the battle saw something unprecedented in galactic history. Former Council species, their modifications reversed and their true nature restored, arrived to fight alongside humanity. The Zelthari brought ships that could phase through solid matter. The Altuni wielded gravity weapons that turned enemy vessels inside out. Ambassador Taehyun, still on Centauri Prime but now leading a provisional government of free species, coordinated the alliance that was reshaping galactic politics. "The old council is finished," he announced in a broadcast to every inhabited world. "But what comes next is up to all of us." Back in the architect facility, Jaewon learned the most important lesson of all. The ancient being showed him visions of what the galaxy could become. Worlds where species worked together not because they were programmed to, but because they chose to. Technologies that enhanced life rather than controlling it. Exploration that pushed the boundaries of reality itself. The modifications were never about peace, the architect explained. They were about fear. Fear of change, fear of growth, fear of becoming something greater. As the battles raged across the galaxy, a new pattern emerged. Species that embraced their restored nature flourished, while those that clung to the old ways struggled to adapt. The universe was vast enough for both, but only one path led to transcendence. Commander Song Ji-hoon's stealth fleet had grown into an armada as freed species contributed their own vessels. They struck at Council strongholds with precision and purpose, not to conquer but to liberate. "The Velkari home system has surrendered," his communications officer reported. "They're requesting assistance with genetic reversal procedures." Even Veltaran herself, her crystalline form flickering with uncertainty, finally transmitted a message that shocked the galaxy. We wish to remember what we were before. The revolution was succeeding beyond humanity's wildest dreams. But as Kang Jae-hwan prepared to leave the architect facility with technology that could reshape civilization, he carried with him a sobering warning. "This is only the beginning," the ancient consciousness had told him. "Other galaxies have fallen to the same stagnation. Your real work starts when you look beyond these stars." The galaxy was awakening from its 50,000-year sleep, but the universe held challenges that would test every species' newfound freedom. The great chamber on Centauri Prime filled quickly as delegates took their seats for what many expected to be a simple ceremony. Today, humanity would join the ranks of civilized species by accepting the Council's generous terms. Ambassador Kim Tae-hyun walked to the center of the floor, carrying a simple data case that would change galactic history. Behind him, Park Ji-won and Choi Min-hyuk took their positions. In orbit above, Captain Lee Dong-hae maintained radio silence aboard the Indomitable, but every human ship in the sector was ready. Veltaran of the Velkari Empire rose from her crystal throne, her blue skin glowing with satisfaction. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Taehyun of Earth. We trust you bring news of your species' acceptance of our guidance." Taehyun activated a holographic projector, and images began appearing above the chamber floor. "Honored Council members, my species has indeed reached a decision. But first, we wish to share some discoveries we have made during our time in your galaxy." The first image showed ancient ruins on a barren world. Murmurs rippled through the audience as beings recognized structures that should not exist. "These ruins are over 50,000 years old," Taehyun announced. "We found them on worlds throughout this sector. Worlds your records claim have always been empty." Korathvel's mechanical voice carried a note of irritation. "Ancient ruins are common throughout the galaxy. This proves nothing." "You're correct," Taehyun replied calmly. "Individual ruins prove little, but patterns tell stories." The hologram shifted to show a galactic map dotted with thousands of sites. Every world currently inhabited by Council species showed traces of these older civilizations. The species that built these ruins called themselves the Architects, Park Ji-won announced, stepping forward. They were explorers, inventors, and warriors who refused to accept limitations on their growth. Nervous whispers spread through the chamber. Several younger delegates leaned forward with obvious interest, while the older representatives looked increasingly uncomfortable. "This is irrelevant to today's proceedings," the SciFiPrime declared, its crystal formation pulsing with agitated light.
"Ancient history has no bearing on humanity's choice." Taehyun smiled.
"Actually, it has everything to do with our choice. You see, we discovered something fascinating in these ruins. Complete genetic records of every species that has ever lived in this galaxy. The hologram now displayed genetic charts comparing current council species to their ancestors. The differences were stark and undeniable. Every single member of this council has been artificially modified," Taehyun stated. "Your neural pathways have been altered to suppress curiosity, reduce aggression, and create blind spots in your perception." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Some delegates shouted in outrage while others sat in stunned silence. A few of the younger representatives began frantically checking their own genetic records. Velteran's voice cut through the noise like ice. "These accusations are absurd. We have guided younger species for thousands of years, helping them achieve peace and prosperity. Have you?" Park Ji-won activated new displays showing brain scan comparisons. "Or have you been passing on the same modifications that were forced on your own ancestors?" The evidence was overwhelming. Species after species showed the same pattern: natural neural development until joining the council, then sudden changes that aligned perfectly with the harmony protocols. Choi Min-hyuk stepped forward with trembling hands but a steady voice. "We found records of what you were before the modifications. The Velkari were once explorers who traveled between dimensions. The Nexari were individual artists and inventors, not a collective consciousness. The Korthans built cities that spanned entire gas giants." "You are magnificent," Taehyun said, his voice filled with genuine sadness. "All of you. And then you chose safety over growth, peace over possibility." Representative Thakvar of the Zelthari Confederation suddenly stood. "Is this why my people have never felt the urge to explore beyond our system? Why we accept limitations that make no logical sense?" Other voices joined in as the truth spread through the chamber like wildfire. Decades and centuries of suppressed questions suddenly found voice. The SciFiPrime's crystal formation flickered rapidly. "Even if these claims were true, the modifications have brought peace. There has been no major war in this galaxy for over 10,000 years. Because you removed the capacity for growth," Taehyun replied. "But we found something else in those ruins. Records of what the architects discovered before they transcended physical existence." The hologram shifted to show images that defied easy description. Vast constructs in space, technologies that bent reality itself, entire worlds reshaped according to their inhabitants' needs. "This is what's possible when a species refuses to accept limitations," Park Ji-won announced. "The architects didn't disappear because they were defeated. They evolved beyond the need for physical form." Velteran's composure finally cracked. "This is exactly why such species must be controlled. Unchecked growth leads to chaos and destruction." "Does it?" Taehyun challenged. "Or does it lead to transcendence? To becoming something greater than what you were?" The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. For the first time in millennia, beings throughout the galaxy were questioning the foundations of their civilization. Korath Vel activated emergency protocols, and armed security forces began moving toward the chamber. "Enough of this heresy. Humanity will accept the modifications or face immediate quarantine." Taehyun looked up at the beings who had tried to cage his species, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he smiled. "You offer us the same chains that bind you all," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "You ask us to surrender our very essence, our capacity to grow and strive and become more than we are." The silence was absolute. Even the security forces had stopped moving, transfixed by the moment. "And to that," Taehyun continued, "we say..." Every being in the chamber held their breath. The future of galactic civilization balanced on his next words. "Now we go to war." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Emergency alarms began wailing throughout Centauri Prime as human ships decloaked around the planet. But more shocking was what happened in the chamber itself. Ancient systems hidden within the structure began activating, responding to unmodified neural patterns for the first time in 50,000 years. The architect technology recognized humanity as its inheritors. Veltaran screamed commands in her native language, but half the species' representatives were no longer listening. They were staring at the evidence before them, finally seeing the cages they had lived in their entire lives. Park Ji-won activated a galaxy-wide broadcast system that had been hidden in human diplomatic equipment. "People of the galaxy," her voice rang out across thousands of worlds, "you have been living a lie, but it's not too late to reclaim what you were meant to be." Choi Min-hyuk began transmitting genetic reversal procedures that could undo centuries of modifications, while Captain Lee Dong-hae's voice crackled through communications. "Ambassador, the fleet is in position. Ancient defense platforms are coming online throughout the sector." As security forces finally reached the human delegation, Taehyun stood his ground. "The galaxy has been asleep for 50,000 years, he declared. "Today we wake it up." The chamber erupted into complete chaos as some species representatives fought to escape, while others demanded access to the genetic reversal data. The Council's perfect order was dissolving before their eyes. But this was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, suppressed species were receiving humanity's broadcast and learning the truth about their own history. The revolution that the architects had started so long ago was finally about to be completed. The war for galactic freedom had begun. The massive chamber on SciFiPrime buzzed with quiet conversation as beings from across the galaxy took their seats. Kim Taehyun walked slowly down the center aisle, his black diplomatic uniform standing out among the colorful robes and strange forms of alien delegates. Behind him, 3 other humans followed in silence. Taehyun had been Earth's top military strategist before becoming a diplomat. His sharp eyes took in every detail of the room. The Velkari representatives sat in their floating crystal chairs, their blue skin glowing softly. The gas-dwelling Korthans filled their pressurized tubes with swirling mist. Dozens of other species watched the humans with curious or hostile eyes. At the front of the chamber, 3 enormous thrones dominated the space. These belonged to the Council's most powerful members, the ones who would decide humanity's fate today. Park Ji-won, the chief science advisor, leaned close to Taehyun. "The scanning equipment detected at least 40 different species here," she whispered. "All of them have agreed to the restrictions they want to place on us." Choi Min-hyuk, the youngest member of their team, shifted nervously. "Ambassador, are you sure about this plan?" Taehyun's face remained calm. "We knew this day would come, Min-hyuk. 3 years of probation. 3 years of them watching our every move. Today they show their true intentions." Captain Lee Dong-hae, commander of the human escort ship waiting in orbit, checked his communication device. His job was to protect the diplomatic team, but he knew there was much more at stake today. A deep tone filled the chamber and all conversation stopped. The 3 council leaders entered through hidden doors behind their thrones. First came Veltaran of the Velkari Empire, her crystalline body reflecting the room's lights. Next was the HFY, a collective consciousness that spoke through a single crystal formation. Finally, Korath Vel materialized in his environmental suit representing the gas giant dwellers. Veltaran's voice echoed without her moving her mouth. "The Galactic Council calls this session to order. We gather today to address the human question." Taehyun stood as hundreds of alien eyes focused on him. He had practiced this moment many times, but the weight of representing all humanity pressed down on his shoulders. "Humans of Earth," Veltaran continued, "for 3 years you have been our guests in this galaxy. We have watched your species with great interest and some concern." The HFY's crystal pulsed with light as it spoke. "Your rapid expansion troubles us. In 3 years you have established colonies on 12 worlds. Most species take decades to achieve such growth." Korath Vel's mechanical voice added, "Your technological advancement is also concerning. You reverse engineer our gifts too quickly. You ask too many questions about things you should not understand." Taehyun listened without expression, but inside he felt a cold anger building. These beings spoke of humanity as if they were children who had misbehaved. "Most troubling," Veltaran said, "is your refusal to accept our harmony protocols. Every civilized species in this galaxy has accepted these beneficial modifications. They bring peace, reduce conflict, and create the stable society we all enjoy. Park Ji-won's hand tightened on her datapad. She had studied those so-called beneficial modifications extensively. What she had discovered would shock the galaxy, but today was not the time to reveal it. Therefore, the SciFiPrime announced, we offer humanity a final choice. Accept our guidance and restrictions, or face isolation from galactic civilization. The chamber fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Veltaran stood and began reading from a formal document. Humanity will accept technological limitations preventing them from advancing beyond approved levels. They will submit to genetic modifications that promote harmony and reduce aggressive tendencies. They will abandon all colonies beyond the Sol system and remain within designated boundaries. Each word hit Taehyun like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral. Around the chamber, alien delegates nodded approvingly. Some had been through the same process centuries ago. In return, Korathvel added, humanity will be granted limited membership in our galactic community. You will have access to approved technologies and trade opportunities. Your species will survive and prosper within proper bounds, Choi Min-hyuk whispered urgently. They want to cage us, turn us into pets like the others. Taehyun raised his hand for permission to speak. Veltaran nodded graciously. Honored council members, Taehyun began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. This is indeed a generous offer. High species has much to consider. Relief flickered across some alien faces. They expected humanity to submit just as everyone else had. However, Taehyun continued, such a momentous decision requires careful thought. I request a recess of 24 hours to consult with my government and advisors. The three council leaders exchanged glances that somehow conveyed volumes of communication. Finally, Veltaran nodded. Very well. The council grants your request. We reconvene at this same time tomorrow for your final answer. As the session ended and beings began filing out, Taehyun activated a small device hidden in his sleeve. It sent a coded message that would travel faster than light to Earth, then to hidden human outposts throughout the galaxy. The message was simple. Operation Prometheus is a go. Captain Lee Donghae felt his communication device vibrate with an incoming priority message. He read it quickly, then began issuing quiet orders to his crew. The escort ship Indomitable was just one of many human vessels scattered throughout the sector, all waiting for this signal. Park Ji-won gathered her research materials with steady hands, though her heart raced. 6 months of secret preparation were about to pay off. The council thought they knew everything about humanity, but they were about to learn how wrong they were. As the human delegation left the chamber, Choi Min-hyuk noticed something strange. Several of the younger alien delegates watched them leave with expressions he couldn't quite read. Hope, curiosity, fear? Back in their quarters, Taehyun finally allowed himself to show emotion. His jaw tightened as he looked out at the stars. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years they let us think we were being evaluated fairly. All this time, they were just waiting for us to accept our chains willingly. Park Ji-won activated a secure communication system. The archaeological teams report they're ready. The fleet is in position. Everything we've worked for comes down to tomorrow. Lee Donghae's voice crackled through the comm. Sir, long-range sensors show increased military activity in surrounding systems. I think they're preparing for the possibility that we might refuse. Taehyun smiled grimly. Let them prepare. They have no idea what they're actually facing. As night fell on Centauri Prime, the human delegation made their final preparations. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for humanity but for every species in the galaxy. The council members slept peacefully, confident in their ancient system of control. They had no idea that their newest subjects had already found the keys to breaking chains that had bound the galaxy for thousands of years. 6 months earlier, Dr. Park Ji-won stood in a hidden laboratory deep beneath the surface of Mars. Around her, teams of scientists worked frantically on pieces of alien technology that officially did not exist. The objects scattered across the lab tables looked nothing like the sleek devices the Galactic Council had shared with humanity. These artifacts were older, much older. Doctor, you need to see this, called Young Hee-won from across the lab. The young archaeologist had dirt under her fingernails and excitement in her eyes. The dating results came back from the Kepler 442 site. Ji-won walked over to where Hee-won stood beside a massive stone tablet covered in strange symbols. The tablet hummed with barely contained energy, even after sitting buried for millennia. How old? Ji-won asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 50,000 years minimum, maybe older. Haiwan pulled up holographic displays showing similar artifacts found on 7 different worlds. Doctor, this changes everything. These ruins predate every species currently in the Galactic Council. Ji-won nodded slowly. For months, human archaeological teams had been secretly exploring worlds that the Council claimed were empty or unsuitable for study. On each world, they found the same thing: ruins of an ancient civilization that the Council had somehow overlooked or ignored. What about the genetic analysis? Ji-won asked. Yoon Seojin, commander of Earth's hidden military fleet, emerged from a secured section of the lab. Her uniform bore no official insignia, and her very existence was classified at the highest levels. The results are disturbing, she said, handing Ji-won a data tablet. Ji-won read the report, her expression growing darker with each line. Every single Council species shows signs of artificial genetic modification. Not natural evolution, deliberate tampering. It gets worse, Seojin continued. The modifications all follow the same pattern: enhanced cooperation, reduced aggression, decreased curiosity about certain topics. They've all been programmed. Across the lab, Bae Youngmin looked up from his workstation. As head of human intelligence, he had been tracking Council communications for years. The archaeological evidence supports this. Every species currently in the Council went through what they call uplift by an elder race. But the timeline doesn't match their official histories. Ji-won walked to the center of the lab where a massive holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked the locations of the ancient ruins, while blue dots showed current Council worlds. They're not coincidences, she realized aloud. Every Council world was once home to these older ruins. The current inhabitants were placed there after the original builders disappeared. Hwon activated controls that overlaid new information on the galactic map. We've identified the original species from genetic traces in the ruins. They called themselves the Architects. And according to these records, they didn't disappear, they were overthrown. The hologram shifted to show ancient battle sites, destroyed cities, and what looked like massive evacuation routes leading to the galaxy's edge. The Architects were explorers, inventors, warriors, Youngman read from translated texts. They refused to accept limitations on their growth or expansion. So the elder races of that time united to stop them. Seojin's expression was grim. The pattern repeats. Any species that shows too much independence gets invited to join the Council. They accept the modifications willingly, thinking it's advancement. By the time they realize what they've lost, it's too late. Ji-won studied readouts from the alien technology they had recovered. Unlike the simple devices the Council shared, these architect artifacts were incredibly sophisticated. More importantly, they responded to human neural patterns in ways that Council technology did not. The modifications, she said suddenly, they're not just about behavior. They change how a species thinks, how they perceive reality. That's why Council species can't understand this technology. Hwon pulled up brain scans comparing humans to various Council species. Look at the neural pathway differences. Their modifications create blind spots, literally preventing them from seeing certain concepts or possibilities. Which explains why they missed all these ruins, Youngman added. They can't perceive them as significant. Seojin activated a secure communication channel. Admiral Park, this is Base 7. Initiate Phase 2 of Operation Prometheus. Far above, in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, hidden shipyards came to life. Human engineers had spent months reverse engineering architect technology, building ships and weapons that the Council couldn't imagine. Back in the lab, Ji-won made the connection that would change everything. They're not the elder races, she said quietly. The Council members aren't ancient species guiding younger ones. They're previous victims who became enforcers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Velkari, the Nexari, the Korthans, they were all independent species once, Haiwan whispered. They were modified just like they want to modify us. Seojin checked her chronometer. The diplomatic team leaves for SciFiPrime in 3 days. Are we certain about this intelligence? Ji-won walked to a containment unit holding the most significant artifact they had discovered, a crystalline data core that contained what appeared to be a complete history of galactic civilization. The Architects left this for someone to find, she said. Someone who could resist the modifications long enough to understand the truth. They knew this day would come. Youngman activated another display showing human expansion patterns over the past 3 years. We've been following their example without realizing it. Rapid exploration, technological advancement, refusing to accept artificial limitations. That's why the Council is moving against us now, Seojin concluded. We're becoming too much like the architects. They see the threat we represent. Haiwan began carefully packing the most important artifacts for transport. These need to reach Ambassador Taehyun before the hearing. The Council will demand proof of our claims. Jiwon nodded, but her attention was focused on readings from the crystalline data core. There's something else. The architects didn't just disappear or die out. According to this, they found a way to transcend physical existence. They're still out there in some form. Waiting for what? Seojin asked. For a species that could resist the modifications long enough to restart their work, Jiwon replied. A species that would choose growth over safety, exploration over comfort. The lab's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Captain Lee Donghae's voice filled the room. Dr. Jiwon, we've detected increased Council fleet movements in all sectors. They're positioning forces for something big. Seojin smiled grimly. They're preparing for our refusal. They never intended to let us choose freely. Jiwon began uploading the archaeological data to secured servers throughout human space. Then we make sure the truth survives regardless of what happens to us. As the team prepared to depart Mars, Haiwan made one final discovery. Hidden in the deepest section of the ruins was a chamber that had remained sealed for 50,000 years. Inside, they found not just artifacts, but a message. The holographic recording showed a being that looked remarkably human, though taller and with slightly different proportions. When it spoke, the translation systems barely managed to convert the ancient language. To those who come after, the figure said, we leave you the tools and knowledge to break the chains we could not. The galaxy sleeps under forced peace, but someday someone will wake it up. We trust that someone will choose wisely. Jiwon copied the message to her personal files. Tomorrow, Ambassador Taehyun would stand before the Galactic Council, with the power to free the galaxy or doom humanity to the same fate as countless species before them. As the research team scattered to their various assignments, each carrying pieces of the truth that would soon shake the foundations of galactic civilization, none of them could have imagined how dramatically their discoveries would change everything. The architects had been waiting 50,000 years for someone like humanity to find their legacy. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn whether their wait had been worthwhile. 1 year after Ambassador Kim Taehyun declared war on the Galactic Council, the same great chamber on SciFiPrime hosted a very different gathering. Representatives from over 300 species filled the seats, but these beings bore little resemblance to the subdued delegates who had once rubber-stamped council decisions. Lim Chae-young, the first Director General of the new Galactic Federation, stood where the council thrones once dominated the chamber. Unlike the imposing crystal seats of the old regime, her simple podium emphasized equality over hierarchy. We gather today not as subjects and rulers, she announced, but as free peoples choosing our shared future. In the front rows, former enemies sat side by side. Veltaran of the Velkari had undergone genetic reversal and now appeared as her ancestors had, curious, innovative, and eager to explore dimensions beyond physical space. Beside her, individual Nexari delegates created impromptu art installations that reflected their restored personal creativity. Ambassador Taehyun, now Secretary of Interspecies Affairs, watched with satisfaction as species that had been enemies for millennia worked together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. The Zelthari Altuni joint colony ship launches next week, reported Kim Naeon, the youngest ambassador in galactic history. They're heading for the Andromeda approach vector, hoping to make contact with whatever civilizations exist there. Captain Lee Donghae, now Admiral of the Federation Exploration Fleet, studied star charts that showed human and alien ships working together on the greatest project in galactic history, preparing for contact with other galaxies. The architect technology has given us capabilities we're still learning to understand, he said. We can travel between galaxies in months rather than millennia. But we need to be ready for what we might find. Oh Sehun, leading the Architect Technology Research Consortium, had spent the past year working with freed species to unlock the full potential of the ancient devices. The discoveries had exceeded every prediction. We've identified 12 other galaxies within range that show signs of similar stagnation patterns, he reported. If the architects were right, there are millions of species across the universe living under artificial limitations. Dr. Park Ji-won, now head of the Genetic Liberation Institute, had overseen the restoration of over 200 species to their natural states. The results were remarkable, not just in terms of capabilities, but in terms of happiness and fulfillment. The psychological changes are as significant as the physical ones, she explained to a gathering of medical researchers. Beings who spent centuries feeling vaguely dissatisfied suddenly understand why. They were living as shadows of what they were meant to be. But perhaps the most significant change was in the youngest generation. Children born to genetically restored parents showed capabilities that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for 50,000 years. Choi Min-hyuk, now Minister of Education for the new Federation, observed classes where young Velkari learned to phase through dimensions while Zelthari children manipulated gravity as easily as their ancestors had shaped clay. They don't see these abilities as unusual, he noted with wonder. To them, this is simply normal development. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some individuals and even entire species struggled to adapt to their restored natures. Support groups helped beings cope with suddenly remembering suppressed ambitions and dreams. Therapists specialized in helping people adjust to capabilities they had never been allowed to develop. But for every difficulty, there were 10 innovations. The Korathan gas dwellers had built atmospheric cities that defied conventional physics. The Nexari were creating art forms that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Zelthari had developed technologies that made matter and energy interchangeable. And humanity? Humanity had found its role not as conquerors, but as teachers and facilitators. Human Diplomatic Corps worked tirelessly to help newly freed species navigate their transformation, while human scientists collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Ambassador Taehyun stood once again in the Great Chamber, but this time he was not delivering ultimatums. Today marked the signing of the new Galactic Charter, a document that enshrined the right of every species to grow, explore, and become whatever they were capable of becoming. We, the free peoples of the galaxy, he read from the Charter's opening words, choose growth over stagnation, challenge over comfort, and the unknown over the safe harbor of limitation. The signing ceremony was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of formal protocols, it became a celebration of diversity and possibility. Zelthari musicians played instruments that existed in folded space. Velkari artists painted with light itself. Korathan poets recited verses that could only be understood by minds capable of perceiving multiple realities simultaneously. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Lee Donghae prepared to depart on the most ambitious mission in galactic history. The exploration fleet he commanded included ships from dozens of species, all working together to make contact with distant galaxies. We don't know what we'll find out there, he told his crew, but whatever it is, we'll face it as free beings choosing our own destiny. Engineer Kang Jae-won, now humanity's primary liaison with the architect consciousness, received final instructions from the ancient beings who had transcended physical existence. You have succeeded beyond our greatest hopes, the architect told him. But remember, transcendence is not a destination, it's a journey. Each generation must choose anew whether to grow or stagnate. As the Federation fleet prepared to depart for other galaxies, signals were already coming back from advanced scouts. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of civilizations trapped in the same stagnation that had gripped this galaxy for so long. Dr. Park Ji-won, reading reports from the scout ships, felt both excitement and responsibility. There are entire galaxy clusters where no one has asked a new question in millions of years, she told her research team. Our work is just beginning. The chamber on Centauri Prime slowly emptied as delegates returned to their home worlds, carrying with them the freedom to dream impossible dreams. But the building itself had been transformed into something new, a school where young beings from across the galaxy came to learn not just facts and skills, but how to think, how to question, and how to grow. Kim Na-yeon, watching a class of mixed-species children solve problems that had baffled their ancestors, smiled at the future taking shape before her eyes. The old council promised peace and safety. She mused to Choi Minyuk. We've given them something better, the chance to become magnificent. As night fell on Centauri Prime, the stars seemed brighter than they had in 50,000 years. Ships from 100 worlds traveled freely between systems, carrying not just goods and messages, but ideas and possibilities. In the depths of space, the architect consciousness watched through sensors scattered across the galaxy, observing the children they had nurtured, finally taking their first steps toward transcendence. And in the darkness between galaxies, long-range sensors detected something unprecedented, responses to Federation broadcasts from civilizations so distant that their light would take millions of years to reach Earth. The galaxy had awakened from its artificial sleep. But the universe held infinite possibilities for those brave enough to seek them. The age of stagnation was over. The age of infinite growth had begun. Standing on the observation deck of the exploration flagship New Horizon, Ambassador Tae-hyun looked out at stars that called to every free being in the galaxy. Somewhere among those distant lights waited civilizations that had forgotten how to dream. It was time to wake them up too,